She arrived at that farm with a battered suitcase and a secret no one could decipher. Inside that suitcase was something the farmer would stumble upon by chance, something that would completely change the way he tried to reach her heart. But can you imagine living with such a fear of being touched that even a handshake makes your entire body lock up? What has to happen in a woman's life for her to build walls so high that not even kindness can scale them? This story took place in the rolling hills of rural Tennessee in March of 1923, on a farm where a man's patience was tested in ways he never imagined. Before we continue, I have a quick favor to ask. If you are enjoying this story, leave a comment down below telling me where you are watching from. Just write the name of your city or state. It really helps the channel grow and shows me that there are folks from all over the world following these stories of days gone by. And if you aren't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapters. Now, let's get back to the story. Evelyn never imagined her life would end that way, or rather, that it would begin again. Because what she had lived through for the last 5 years couldn't be called a life. It was survival disguised as a marriage. She was 27 years old, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived twice that long. Brown hair always pulled back in a severe bun, delicate hands that trembled when anyone got too close, and a posture that seemed to want to occupy the smallest amount of space possible in the world. As if she had learned that existing too much was dangerous. 5 years earlier, Evelyn was a different person. She lived in Chattanooga with her Aunt Eleanor in a small house filled with light, where she spent her days embroidering trousseaux for the wealthy families of the region. Her fingers created entire gardens on white linen, birds that looked ready to take flight, monograms so perfect they looked printed. The women fought over her services. They said Evelyn Thorne had gifted hands, that every stitch she made carried a piece of her soul. She was known, respected, and for the first time in her life, she felt she had a place in the world. It was during one of these deliveries that she met Arthur Sterling. He was the son of a prosperous merchant, a 32-year-old man, well-dressed with beautiful words and even more beautiful promises. He appeared at Aunt Eleanor's house on a September day, saying he needed a special gift for his mother. Evelyn embroidered a set of napkins with orange blossoms for him, every petal so delicate it looked real. When he returned to pick up the work, he didn't talk about the order. He talked about her. About her eyes, her talent, about how a woman like her deserved better than spending her life stitching for others. Aunt Eleanor was suspicious from day one. She said men from rich families don't marry poor seamstresses without a motive. But Evelyn, at 22, wanted to believe it was different. She wanted to believe in the sweet words, the gifts, the frequent visits. When Arthur asked for her hand 3 months later, she said yes with a heart so full of hope it barely fit in her chest. Her aunt wept on the wedding day, and Evelyn thought it was from happiness. She only understood years later that they were tears of someone who already knew the end of the story. The first few months were bearable. Arthur took her to a house on the outskirts of Chattanooga, an isolated property that belonged to his family. He said he wanted privacy, that he wanted to build a life far from prying eyes. Evelyn found the distance strange, but she accepted it. She also accepted when he asked her to stop embroidering for others. He said his wife didn't need to work, that such things were for people in need. She put away her needles and threads, feeling a strange emptiness in her hands, but wanting to be a good wife. The truth began to appear slowly, like rust taking over iron. Arthur didn't like it when she talked too much, didn't like it when she wore certain dresses, didn't like it when she looked directly at him. The list of things he didn't like grew every week, and Evelyn began to adjust herself, shrinking, trying to disappear enough not to awaken his anger, because anger was what came when she erred. Not anger with shouting. That would have been easy to identify. It was a cold, calculated anger that came in long silences, in locked doors, in words that cut deeper than any blade. He never raised a hand to her. He didn't need to. Arthur had more subtle ways of breaking a person. He would take her old embroidery pieces, the ones she kept as keepsakes, and burn them one by one in the fireplace while calmly explaining that this was the past, that she needed to forget who she was before. He would lock the bedroom door from the outside and leave her alone for days when he thought she had been disrespectful. He invited acquaintances for dinner and spent the entire evening telling stories that made her seem foolish, incapable, pathetic, while everyone laughed and she pretended to smile with her fingernails digging into her own palms under the table. Evelyn stopped speaking, stopped looking people in the eye, stopped taking up space. She would hunch her shoulders when someone entered the room, lower her head, measure every word 3 times before letting it leave her mouth. Her fingers forgot the movements of embroidery. Her hands forgot they had once created beauty. She became a shadow in her own life, waiting only for the days to pass without incident. It was like that for 5 years, 5 years that felt like 50. Until one January morning in 1923, Arthur simply didn't wake up. His heart stopped during the night, they said later. Evelyn found him in bed, motionless, and the first thing she felt wasn't sadness. It was a relief so vast it filled her with guilt. What kind of person feels relief at the death of their own husband? She asked herself that for weeks, while wearing the black dress and receiving condolences that sounded hollow. Arthur's family made it clear she was no longer welcome. The only son had died, the property reverted to them, and Evelyn could take her things and leave. She returned to Chattanooga, but Aunt Eleanor had passed away 2 years prior. The house where she grew up had new residents. The old clients had other seamstresses now. Evelyn was completely alone, without money, without a home, without an identity. Who was she now? She wasn't the talented embroiderer anymore. She wasn't anyone's wife anymore. She was just a 27-year-old woman with a battered suitcase and hands that shook when anyone came too close. It was Mrs. Higgins, an old client of Aunt Eleanor, who suggested Willow Creek Farm. She said she had a cousin in Oak Hollow who knew a farmer looking for a housekeeper. A serious man, hard-working, large property, paid well, and treated the help with respect. Evelyn accepted without thinking much. Anywhere was better than wandering around Chattanooga facing looks of pity. She took her suitcase, boarded the train, and left behind the last fragments of the life she had known. The journey lasted nearly a whole day. Evelyn spent the hours looking out the window, watching the cities fall behind and the landscape transform. Mountains covered in green, farms that looked like paintings, a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She didn't speak to anyone. When someone sat next to her and tried to strike up a conversation, she feigned sleep or simply answered with monosyllables until the person gave up. It wasn't rudeness, it was protection. Conversation meant opening doors, and all the doors inside her needed to remain locked. She arrived in Oak Hollow in the late afternoon. The town was smaller than Chattanooga, with unpaved streets, simple houses, and a slower rhythm that made everything seem frozen in time. Mrs. Higgins' cousin, Mrs. Gable, was waiting at the station. She was a robust woman of about 50, with a wide smile and a motherly manner that made Evelyn instinctively take a step back. Mrs. Gable noticed the retreat but didn't comment. She just took one of the suitcases and pointed to the buggy that was waiting. Willow Creek Farm was a 2-hour ride from town. They left while there was still daylight, but night fell quickly, and Evelyn made the last leg of the journey looking at stars that seemed brighter there than anywhere she had ever seen. Mrs. Gable tried to chat at first, asking simple questions about the trip, the weather, about nothing in particular. Evelyn answered the bare minimum. Eventually, the woman got the message and continued in silence, just guiding the horses along the dirt road. When they finally arrived, Evelyn couldn't see much in the darkness. Shapes of buildings, fences, enormous trees swaying in the wind. There was a light on in one of the windows of the main house. Mrs. Gable stopped the buggy near a wooden gate and called out. A man appeared on the porch. Even in the dim light, Evelyn could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, with the sure walk of someone who knows every stone of his own ground. He walked down the steps and headed toward them. "This is Daniel," Mrs. Gable said with a cheerful voice. "Daniel, this is Evelyn, the girl I told you about, the one who's going to work here." Daniel stopped at a respectful distance. He didn't get too close, didn't try to help with the bags without asking, didn't extend a hand to shake. He just tilted his head slightly and said, "Good evening," in a low, calm voice. "Welcome to Willow Creek," he added. "I hope you feel comfortable here." Evelyn murmured something that might have been thanks. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, her hands gripping the handle of her suitcase so hard her knuckles turned white. Daniel observed for a second, and something passed through his eyes. It wasn't pity. It was recognition, as if he knew exactly what he was looking at. A broken person trying to keep the pieces together. "I'll show you to your room," he said. "You must be tired from the trip." He picked up one of the suitcases, leaving the other for Evelyn to carry if she wished, and walked toward a smaller building beside the main house. Mrs. Gable said her goodbyes quickly, saying she needed to get back to town before it got too late, and drove off, leaving Evelyn alone with this stranger. The room was in a tenant cottage out back, separate from the main house. It was simple but clean. An iron bed with a thick mattress, a small table with a chair, a trunk for clothes, a window with calico curtains. Daniel lit the kerosene lamp that was on the table, and the yellow light revealed details Evelyn hadn't noticed. There was a pitcher with fresh water and a basin to wash her face, a clean towel folded with care, an extra quilt on the bed because the nights in March were already starting to get chilly. "The cook has coffee ready early in the morning," Daniel explained, still standing near the door, respecting the distance. "Usually at 5:30. You can have breakfast before starting work. The duties are tending to the main house, helping Mrs. Hattie in the kitchen when she asks, and keeping order in the common areas. Nothing too heavy." He paused, as if choosing his next words with care. "You can be at ease here," he said finally. "No one will bother you. You have your privacy." Evelyn nodded without looking up. Daniel waited another moment, as if he were going to say something else, but changed his mind. "Good night, then," he said, and left, closing the door slowly. Evelyn listened to his footsteps receding over the packed dirt, the sound of his boots getting fainter until it vanished completely. Only then did she take a deep breath, really breathed, for the first time in hours. She locked the door from the inside, checked it twice, and only then set the suitcases on the floor. She sat on the bed, which groaned a little under the weight, but was firm and comfortable. The silence around her was different from the silence of the city. It had sounds inside it, crickets, wind in the trees, some distant animal. It wasn't a threatening silence. It was just silence. Evelyn opened the larger suitcase with hands that still trembled slightly. Simple clothes, dark dresses, undergarments, a pair of extra shoes, and at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of old cloth, the remains of her previous life, 3 unfinished embroidery pieces she had managed to hide from Arthur. One had flowers halfway done, loose threads hanging like severed hopes. Another showed a bird that would never gain full wings. The third was just a sketch, a few stitches marking what could have been. She ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling the familiar texture, and something tightened in her chest. It wasn't exactly longing. It was grief for everything that had been stolen, for the lost years, for the hands that had forgotten their function. She wrapped it all back up quickly, as if the contact burned, and shoved it to the bottom of the trunk. That was the past. She wasn't that person anymore. She didn't know who she was now, but she certainly wasn't the embroiderer with gifted hands anymore. She was just Evelyn, a 27-year-old woman who needed to survive one more day, and another, until the days formed something resembling a life again. She slept poorly that first night. She woke at every noise, heart racing, expecting something that didn't come. In the morning, when the grey light of dawn entered through the window, she got up tired but relieved not to have to feign sleep anymore. She washed her face in the basin, pinned her hair in the usual tight bun, put on one of her dark dresses. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall and saw exactly what she expected. A woman without colour, without life. Perfect for going unnoticed. The main house was larger than it seemed in the dark. An old farmhouse construction, with wide porches, tall windows, a shingled roof. Everything well cared for, but with that air of a place that has seen a lot of life. Evelyn entered through the kitchen door, as Daniel had indicated the night before. Inside, an elderly woman was stirring pots on the wood stove. She was short, thin, hair completely white-tied in a bun, hands moving with the assurance of someone who had repeated the same gestures for decades. "You must be Evelyn," the woman said without turning around, as if she had eyes in the back of her head. "I'm Hattie. You can call me Mrs. Hattie. Everyone around here does. There's fresh coffee on the table and biscuits that came out of the oven half an hour ago. Eat before you start work. No one works right on an empty stomach." Evelyn murmured a thanks and sat in one of the chairs at the large wooden table. There was indeed a pot of steaming coffee, biscuits still warm, fresh butter, fruit preserves, a good smell that reminded her of things she had forgotten existed. She poured a cup of coffee, took a biscuit, and ate slowly, chewing every piece with care, as if afraid someone would take the plate away from her in the middle. Mrs. Hattie brought a plate for herself and sat at the other end of the table. She didn't ask questions, didn't fill the silence with idle chatter. She just ate her own breakfast, looking out the window at the growing brightness outside. There was something comforting in that weightless silence. Evelyn realized she didn't need to speak, didn't need to explain, didn't need to fill space. She could just exist there, drinking coffee, and no one was going to demand anything from her. Work began right after. Mrs. Hattie explained the routine with a firm but not harsh voice. Sweep the house, dust the furniture, wash the dishes from meals, keep order in the common areas, nothing too complicated. Daniel lived alone in the main house, so there wasn't the chaos of a large family. There were few hands on the farm. 2 farmhands who took care of the cattle and fences, but they slept in a bunkhouse far from there and rarely appeared near the house. It was a quiet place, almost lonely. Evelyn spent the first week trying to become invisible. She did her work with care, but quickly, wanting to finish and return to her room before anyone wanted conversation. When she crossed paths with Daniel in the hallways, she lowered her head and pressed herself against the wall, giving him space to pass. He always said good morning or good afternoon, but never stopped, never forced conversation, never asked questions. He just went his way, letting her go hers. It was in the second week that she started noticing the strange details. Little things that appeared and made no sense. One day, upon returning to her room in the late afternoon, she found a handful of wildflowers left on the doorstep. Simple wild blooms, but vibrant, yellows and purples. She looked around, but there was no one. She picked up the flowers, took them inside, put them in the pitcher with water. She didn't know why, but it seemed wrong to let them wilt. The next day, more flowers, different ones this time. Delicate whites. She left them with the others in the pitcher. On the third day it wasn't flowers, it was a cup of coffee, still hot, covered with a small cloth left in the same spot. She took it, drank the coffee, looking out the window, and felt something strange in her chest. Not exactly gratitude, because gratitude came accompanied by debt, and she was afraid of debts. But it was something akin to confusion. Why would someone do this without wanting anything in return? One morning when she arrived earlier at the kitchen, she caught Daniel leaving through the back door with a handful of flowers in his hand. He stopped when he saw her, and for a second their gazes crossed. Evelyn looked away first, as always, but not before seeing a strange expression on his face. It wasn't shame at being caught, it was just care, as if he were afraid of scaring her. He didn't say anything, didn't give explanations, just said good morning and kept walking. But Evelyn understood. It was him. He was the one leaving the flowers, he was the one leaving the hot coffee, and that should have made her feel afraid, because in her experience, a man who gives a gift always expects something in return. But Daniel asked for nothing, didn't demand thanks, didn't expect conversation, just left things and went away. It was so different from everything she knew that she didn't know how to process it. Days passed and turned into weeks. April arrived, bringing milder temperatures, mornings with dense fog covering the hills. The flowers kept appearing. Sometimes they came accompanied by other things, extra firewood stacked outside her room when the night promised to be freezing, a thick blanket folded on the chair. Once, a small basket of fresh fruit. There were never notes, there were never explanations. Just silent gifts, left like offerings that asked for nothing in return. Evelyn didn't know how to respond. Didn't know if she should thank him, or if thanking him would create an expectation of conversation she couldn't give. So she pretended she didn't notice. Took the things, used them, but never mentioned them. And Daniel, for his part, also never mentioned them. They existed in that strange dance of silent care. Him offering kindness without pressure, her accepting without being able to reciprocate. It was Mrs. Hattie who finally spoke on the subject. They were in the kitchen peeling potatoes for lunch when the old woman said, without looking up from her work, "He's a good man, Daniel. Lost his mother when he was a child. Took care of his sick father until the end. Learned that love isn't pretty words. It's doing without expecting applause." She paused, then added, "He won't pressure you for anything. You can be at ease. He just wants you to know that someone is paying attention, that you aren't invisible." Evelyn felt something tighten in her throat. She couldn't answer, just continued peeling potatoes with more force, her fingers working fast to occupy her mind. But Mrs. Hattie's words kept echoing. "You aren't invisible." Evelyn had spent 5 years trying to become invisible. It was her survival mechanism. And now someone was saying she was seen. That should be terrifying. For some reason, it wasn't. One Saturday afternoon, Evelyn was cleaning the rooms in the main house. Daniel had gone out early to handle business in town and wouldn't be back until nightfall. She worked more calmly on these days, when she was sure she was alone. She hummed softly sometimes, sounds without a defined melody, just filling the silence. She was dusting the furniture in his room when she saw the suitcase. It was slightly open on a chair, as if he had grabbed something in a hurry before leaving. And there, visible through the opening, were things that made Evelyn stop mid-motion. Skeins of thread, many skeins, varied colours, scraps of fine fabric, the kind she used for delicate embroidery, new needles still in the packaging, an embroidery hoop of pale wood. She stood still, the dust cloth forgotten in her hand, staring at it without understanding. Why would a farmer have embroidery supplies? Why would he have specifically those supplies? And then she understood. He had seen. He'd seen the unfinished embroideries hidden in her suitcase. He had seen when he helped carry her things that first night. And instead of asking, instead of mentioning it, instead of making it a topic of conversation, he had simply bought new materials. He was waiting for the right moment to leave them at her door. Another silent offering. Another way of saying without words that he saw who she really was. Evelyn closed the suitcase quickly, as if she had seen something she shouldn't have. Her heart was beating fast. It wasn't exactly fear, it was something else. Something she hadn't felt in so long she couldn't remember the name. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just the possibility of hope, which was already more than she had had in years. She finished cleaning quickly and went back to her room. Locked the door, opened the trunk, and took the unfinished embroidery pieces from where they were hidden. She looked at them for a long time, ran her fingers over the loose threads, the interrupted stitches, the unfulfilled promises. Her fingers itched with an old desire, but she didn't have the courage yet, didn't have the courage to resume that part of herself, because resuming meant admitting it had been taken away. And admitting that meant feeling all the anger and pain she had pushed down for so long. She put everything back and lay on the bed looking at the ceiling. Outside, the sounds of the farm continued. Birds, wind, life following its course. And somewhere in those sounds, there was room for her. Room to exist without fear. Room to perhaps someday go back to occupying the world instead of just surviving in it. But not yet, not that day. That day it was enough to just breathe and know that someone had paid attention, that someone had seen, and hadn't used it as a weapon. The next morning, Sunday, Evelyn woke to an unusual noise coming from outside. Voices, movement, something breaking the silent routine of the farm. She got dressed and went out to investigate. Daniel was near the barn with the two farmhands, and there was tension in the air. She approached slowly, keeping a safe distance, trying to understand what was happening. One of the hands saw her and explained. A mare had foaled during the night, but there had been complications. The mare hadn't survived, and now there was an orphan foal, a few days old, with no one to care for him. Daniel was trying to decide what to do. The foal was too young. Chances of survival without a mother were slim. It required constant attention, feeding every hour, care that took time he didn't have. Evelyn saw the animal for the first time when they opened the stall door. He was small, fragile, trembling all over on spindly legs, light brown coat with a white star on his forehead, huge frightened eyes. He was trying to stand up and falling, trying again and falling again. There was desperation in those movements, a will to live fighting against a body that could barely support its own weight. She felt something break inside her chest, immediate and visceral recognition. That was her, a frightened animal trying to stand up after everything had collapsed. No mother, no protection, just a foolish will to keep breathing even when the world said it was easier to give up. "I'll take care of him," she said. The words came out before she could think. Everyone turned to look. Daniel more surprised than anyone, because it was the first time she had spoken of her own volition since arriving. She swallowed hard, but repeated, "I'll take care of him. I can feed him. I can give him attention. Just teach me what to do." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. There was something different in that look. It wasn't pity. It was respect, as if he understood exactly what had happened there. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll teach you. But it's hard work. You'll have to feed him every 3 hours. Even during the night, you'll need patience." She nodded that she understood. Patience was something she knew well. She had survived 5 years of hell with patience. She could use that same skill for something good now, to save a life instead of just preserving her own. Daniel spent the rest of the day teaching her, showed her how to prepare the milk, the right temperature, how to make the foal accept the bottle. The animal was stubborn, refused at first, but Evelyn had a steady hand and a soft voice. She whispered words that made no sense, just comforting sounds, and eventually the foal gave in and drank. Not much, but enough. It was a start. She set up a sort of bed in the barn. Daniel brought blankets, a lantern, everything she needed. Said she didn't need to sleep there, that she could go back and forth every 3 hours, but Evelyn refused. She wanted to stay. wanted to be present, wanted the foal to know he wasn't alone, and that was how she passed the next few weeks, divided between housework and caring for the animal. It was exhausting, waking at dawn, preparing milk, feeding, cleaning, going back to sleep for a few hours, and starting over. But it was exhaustion with purpose. It was exhaustion that had meaning. Every day the foal survived was a small victory. Every time he got stronger, it was proof that effort was worth it. Daniel appeared several times a day to check, brought things she needed, offered help, but never took control. Let her command. Let her decide. And in those moments, working side by side, him quiet and respectful beside her, Evelyn realized she didn't retreat anymore when he came close, didn't shrink away, didn't lock up, because he never invaded her space. He arrived, asked if she needed help, and accepted whatever answer she gave. There was no pressure. There was no weight. Just peaceful presence. The foal grew. He earned the name Star because of the white mark on his forehead. He began to follow her around the barn as if she were his mother. Evelyn caught herself smiling sometimes when he nuzzled her, looking for affection. It was a small smile, but it was real, the first in a long time. It was on one of those afternoons, while she was brushing Star's coat and Daniel was fixing a nearby fence, that she spoke for the second time of her own will. "Thank you," she said without looking at him, "for the materials, the flowers, everything." There was a pause. Daniel stopped hammering. "I saw," she continued, her voice low but firm, "the skeins and threads in your suitcase. I saw." Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy," he said. "But when I helped you with your bags that first day, I saw the embroidery, and I thought maybe you'd want to pick it up again. No pressure, only if you want to." He paused. "You don't have to be what others want. You can be who you were, or who you want to become. Here, you can choose." Evelyn felt her eyes sting. She didn't cry because she had forgotten how, but she felt the urge. She nodded, still without looking, and Daniel understood the conversation was over, went back to work on the fence. And they stayed like that, each busy with their tasks, the silence between them full of unsaid things that didn't need to be said. That night, back in her room, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in 5 years. Opened the trunk, took one of the unfinished pieces and looked at it really, not with pain, with possibility. She didn't have needles or threads yet, because Daniel hadn't left the materials yet, or maybe he was waiting for her to be ready. But she held the fabric, ran her fingers over the old stitches, and tried to remember the movements. Her fingers trembled, faltered, but remembered a little. It was a start. Life on the farm established a rhythm. Evelyn continued her work in the house, but now also cared for Star. The foal no longer needed constant feeding, was growing fast, healthy, and full of energy. She spent time in the barn, and Daniel often appeared to help with heavy tasks, or simply check if everything was okay. His gestures continued. Flowers at the door, hot coffee on cold mornings. And one day, finally, the embroidery materials appeared. Not left blatantly, but placed discreetly on the table in her room while she was working. The skeins organized by color, needles separated by size, fabric scraps folded with care. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Evelyn took it all inside, sat on the bed, opened a pale blue skein, and threaded a needle. Her fingers shook. The first stitch was crooked, the second too. But the third came out better, and by the 10th, muscle memory began to return. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She didn't embroider on the old fabrics that night, took a new scrap and started something different. No plan, no sketch, just let the needle move. What came out was chaotic. Irregular stitches, colors that didn't match, but it was complete. It was the first embroidery she had finished in 5 years, and it was ugly. But it was hers. It was her own. It was proof she still existed beneath all layers of fear. She left the small square of embroidered cloth on the table and lay down to sleep. But before blowing out the lamp, she looked at it for a long time, and for the first time in years felt something akin to pride. The days grew colder as May advanced. Evelyn developed her own routine, woke early, helped Mrs. Hattie in the kitchen, tended the house, spent time with Star, and at night, in the privacy of her room, she embroidered. She began completing the old works, added stitches to the birds that had never gained wings, finished the flowers that were half done, and then started new things. Simple napkins, a small picture of a rural landscape. Her hands were remembering, the stitches becoming surer, the colors more harmonious. Daniel never asked to see, never asked about the embroidery, but she knew that he knew. She noticed it in the small smiles he hid when he saw her fingertips stained with ink from colored threads, in the way he brought more materials when he noticed something was running low. Again, without fanfare, without expecting thanks, just the silent act of caring. They started talking more, not long conversations, not intimacies, but simple exchanges. Good mornings that came accompanied by weather forecasts, comments about Star, who was already nearly the size of a young horse and showing a strong personality. Observations about the farm, the animals, the land. They were safe conversations, conversations that didn't require Evelyn to open doors she still kept locked. But there were moments where looks met and lasted half a second longer than necessary. Where their fingers touched by accident when reaching for the same tool or utensil, and Evelyn didn't retreat immediately. Where she caught him watching her work with Star, and there was something in his look that wasn't just respect. It was admiration. It was interest. It was possibility. It was Mrs. Hattie who commented one June day while they were preparing preserves in the kitchen. "You're different," the old woman said. "Less scared, more present." Evelyn didn't answer, but knew it was true. There was still fear, there were still walls, but cracks were appearing, light was finding a way in. And then came the afternoon that changed everything. Evelyn was in the barn with Star when she heard raised voices coming from the front of the house. One belonged to Daniel, the other was female and harsh. She went out to see what was happening and found a well-dressed woman arguing with him on the porch. The woman was older, perhaps 45, with city clothes and a hard expression. "This is my sister, Beatrice," Daniel said when he saw Evelyn approaching. His voice was tense. "Beatrice, this is Evelyn. She works here." The sister barely looked in Evelyn's direction before returning her attention to Daniel. "I came to see if the rumors are true," she said with a cutting voice. "Everyone in town is commenting that you're spending money on expensive materials for the maid." "Embroidery materials, Daniel. What for? She isn't your responsibility. You're wasting time with a damaged woman." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Evelyn felt the words like a physical slap. Damaged woman. The same words she repeated to herself on bad days. Confirmation of what she always knew. That was what people saw. That was what she was. Damaged goods. Daniel turned red. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "And you have no right to come here with judgments about people you don't know." But Beatrice didn't stop. "I know you, brother. You always have a mania for saving those who can't be saved. She won't stay. That kind of woman doesn't stay anywhere. It's only a matter of time until she leaves and you realize you wasted resources and feelings on someone who isn't worth it." Evelyn didn't hear anything else. The blood was pulsing in her ears with such force it drowned out the rest. She turned and went back to the barn with legs that barely supported her weight. Went into the attached room where she slept when she needed to stay near Star and sat on the bed shaking. The words repeated in her head. Damaged woman. Waste of time. Not worth it, not worth it, not worth it. She had been a fool to think she could start over, a fool to think someone like Daniel really cared without wanting something in return, a fool to start letting the walls down. Because it was exactly in these moments that the world reminded you of your place, reminded you that broken people aren't fixed with flowers and patience. They were just broken people occupying space they didn't deserve. The decision came quickly. She couldn't stay, couldn't look at Daniel every day knowing he was wasting resources and feelings on her, that she was his charity project, that eventually he would realize his sister was right. Better to leave now with dignity than wait to be sent away, or worse, wait to see the disappointment in his eyes when he realized she really wasn't worth the effort. Evelyn grabbed the battered suitcase and started putting her things inside. Clothes, shoes, the embroidery, both old and new. She worked fast, with hands that no longer shook, because the decision was made, and decision brought clarity. She heard footsteps approaching, and knew it was Daniel even before he spoke. "Evelyn," he called from the door, "please don't listen to what she said. My sister doesn't know you, doesn't know anything about you." Evelyn didn't stop packing. "She's right," she said with a voice she forced to remain steady. "You're wasting your time. I'm not going to get better, Daniel. I'm not going to wake up one day fixed. You deserve someone who doesn't need flowers at the door every day just to remember she exists. Someone who doesn't shrink when you get close. Someone normal. I don't want someone normal," he said, and there was frustration in his voice now. "I want—" He stopped, took a deep breath. "It's not about you being broken or needing to be fixed. It's about you being who you are, and that being enough. The flowers aren't to fix you. They're because I like seeing you smile when you find them. The embroidery supplies aren't charity. They're because I saw the way you looked at those unfinished works and wanted to give you a chance to finish, if you wanted. That's not waste. That's—" He searched for the words. "That's caring for someone who matters." Evelyn stopped with a dress in her hand, turned to look at him for the first time since the conversation began. His eyes were desperate. It wasn't pity. It was something more complicated. It was fear of loss. She had never seen anyone look at her that way. As if her presence mattered, as if her absence would leave a hole, but the fear was greater than the hope. "I need to go," she said, her voice breaking at the end. "I'm sorry." And she went back to packing, faster now, before her courage evaporated. Daniel stayed in the doorway for another moment, then left without saying anything else. She heard his footsteps walking away and continued packing with tears finally running down her face. Tears she had held back for so long, they burned on the way out. When she finished, it was already late afternoon. She took the suitcase, looked around the small room that had been her refuge, and left. Past the stable and Star whinnied as if sensing something was wrong. Evelyn stopped, stroked his nose one last time. "You'll be fine," she whispered. "You're strong now. You don't need me anymore." She walked down the dirt road toward the main gate of the farm. The sun was going down, painting the sky orange and pink. It was beautiful. Everything there was beautiful. The peace, the silence, the possibility. And she was leaving because she was so afraid of losing it that she preferred to throw it away before it was ripped from her. She reached the gate and stopped, looked at the road stretching out in front, leading back to Oak Hollow, back to nowhere. She had no plans, no destination, just knew she needed to go. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood there, suitcase heavy in her hand, heart heavy in her chest, unable to take the next step. And then she heard it, footsteps behind her, calm, measured, Daniel. He didn't run, didn't shout, just walked until he was a few yards away and stopped. She didn't turn around, couldn't look at him. "I won't stop you from going," he said in a low voice. "If you want to leave, the road is open. You are free. You always were." There was a long pause. "But I want you to know the door is also open. If you change your mind, today, tomorrow, A year from now, it doesn't matter. You will always have a place here. Always. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, heard his footsteps retreating, heard him walk back the way he came. And then silence. Just the wind, the sounds of the countryside at dusk, and her alone at the gate with a choice no one could make for her. Stay or go. Trust or flee. Believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than the cruel voices had said her whole life, or accept that she really was a damaged woman who didn't deserve flowers at the door nor the patience of a good man. The suitcase got heavier. Her fingers hurt from holding it, and she continued there, paralyzed between two worlds, while the sun finished setting and the first stars began to appear in the immense sky. Night fell completely, and Evelyn was still there. The suitcase rested on the ground now, because her arms had tired of holding it. She sat on a rock beside the gate and watched the stars emerging one by one in the dark sky. It was cold, not the cutting cold of winter, but that June chill that seeped into the bones slowly, persistently. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and remained seated, incapable of making a decision. In her head, two voices fought. One said staying was risking too much. It was making room for disappointment, for pain, for all the bad things that came when you trusted someone. The other voice, smaller and weaker, whispered that maybe Daniel was different, that maybe the flowers really were just flowers, that maybe she deserved a chance to discover who she could be without fear. She stayed there the whole night, watched the moon rise and cross the sky, heard the nocturnal sounds of the farm, so familiar now after months. At some point before dawn, the decision came. It wasn't a dramatic moment of revelation. It was just exhaustion. Exhaustion from running away. Exhaustion from being afraid. Exhaustion from letting other people's cruel voices decide her worth. When the first glimmer of dawn appeared on the horizon, Evelyn stood up, picked up the suitcase, and instead of following the road that led away, she turned and walked back. Her steps were slow, uncertain, but they were steps in the right direction. Back to the farm, back to the place that had started to feel like home, even when she tried to deny it. The house was silent when she arrived. She passed the main building, went straight to her room, put the suitcase on the floor, sat on the bed, and only then realized she was shaking. Not from cold, from fear, mixed with something that might be relief. She had chosen to stay, had chosen to try. She didn't know if it was the right choice, but it was her choice, and that had to mean something. She slept a few hours, a heavy sleep born of exhaustion. When she woke up, the sun was already high. She changed clothes, pinned up her hair, and went to the kitchen expecting to find Mrs. Hattie. But who was there was Daniel. He was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in his hands, looking out the window. He turned when he heard her enter, and the expression on his face was of relief so pure, Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. "You came back," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement charged with contained emotion. She nodded, unable to find adequate words. Daniel stood up, took 2 steps toward her, and stopped, respecting the distance as always. "I'm happy you came back," he said with a low voice. "Very happy." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I still think your sister is right, but I'm tired of running. I'm tired of letting other people decide what I deserve." She looked at him finally, sustained the gaze even with fear. "So I'm going to stay, but I don't know if I can be what you expect. I don't know if I can be normal." "I don't expect normal," Daniel replied immediately. "I just expect you to be you, in your time, your way." He paused. "And about my sister, she's already gone. I made it clear her opinions about my life and who I choose to have around aren't welcome. She won't be back." There was a firmness in those words that made Evelyn believe. Daniel wasn't trying to please everyone. He was making a choice too, choosing her, Even with all the walls, all the fears, all the baggage, that should be frightening, but somehow it was comforting. The following days were strange. There was something different in the air, something that had changed with the near departure and the decision to return. Daniel continued leaving flowers, but now sometimes he delivered them personally, would appear in the morning with a handful of wildflowers and say he thought she would like those specific colors. Evelyn accepted, thanked him with a low voice, and there was in those moments a silent connection that went beyond words. She resumed embroidery with more dedication. At night, in her room, her fingers worked creating increasingly elaborate pieces, completed a tablecloth with a border of roses, every petal shaded perfectly, embroidered napkins with decorative initials, started a large panel showing the farm, with the main house, the stable, the hills in the background. It was ambitious work, which would take months, but she had months now. She had time. She had chosen to have time. If you liked the story so far, leave a like and share it with someone who also enjoys these stories from the past. One July afternoon, Mrs. Hattie commented there was a market in town the following Saturday. Said she was going to sell cheeses and preserves she produced, and asked if Evelyn wanted to go along. Evelyn almost refused by instinct, but then realized she was tired of always refusing, so she said yes. Daniel offered to take them in the wagon, and that was how Evelyn made her first outing from the farm since she had arrived months ago. The market was small, set up in the main square of Oak Hollow. Farmers sold produce, women offered crafts. There was the smell of food being prepared and the sound of lively conversations. Mrs. Hattie set up her stall and began to sell. Evelyn stayed helping, and it was then that a lady approached and saw the embroidered napkins Evelyn had brought in a basket. "Did you make this, girl?" the lady asked, pointing to the embroidery. Evelyn hesitated but nodded. The woman picked up one of the napkins and examined it closely, looked at the quality of the stitches, the uniformity, the finish. "How much do you want for these?" Evelyn didn't know how to answer, hadn't thought about selling, had brought them only to show Mrs. Hattie, but the lady was waiting for an answer, and Evelyn murmured a price that seemed fair to her. The woman didn't even haggle, bought the whole set of 6 napkins and said she would return to order more. When she walked away, Mrs. Hattie smiled. "You have talent, girl, talent that's worth money. You should think about making this something more serious." Evelyn hadn't thought about that. Embroidery had always been part of her, but never as a means of real independence. Arthur had taken that from her, but Arthur wasn't there anymore, and she had hands, had ability, and apparently had a market. On the way back, Daniel commented he had seen the sale, said he was impressed with how quickly the lady decided to buy. "You are very talented," he said, looking ahead, guiding the horses. "I think Hattie is right. You could sell more." Evelyn stayed quiet, but inside something was growing. Small idea still, but persistent. Maybe she really could do this. Maybe she could support herself with her own hands, literally and figuratively. Maybe she didn't need to be anyone's maid. Maybe she could be an artisan again, owner of her own work, of her own life. In the following weeks, she began to embroider with a different purpose. Not just to fill time or heal wounds, but to create inventory. Made pieces thinking about what people might want. Napkins, tablecloths, pillowcases, decorative dish towels. Every piece took hours, sometimes days, but the result was extraordinary. Her hands hadn't forgotten. They had just waited for a chance to remember. Daniel set up a corner on the porch of the main house for her to work during the day when the light was better. Brought a comfortable chair, a small table, a basket to store materials. Evelyn protested, saying she could work in her room, but he insisted. Said natural light was important and she didn't need to hide. She accepted, and that was how they began to spend more time close. He worked on the farm, fixing things, tending to animals, and always passed by the porch several times a day. Sometimes stopped to see her work, never touched without asking, never invaded the space, but looked with genuine interest, commented on the colors, on the complexity of the designs, asked questions about the technique. Evelyn discovered she liked explaining, liked talking about something she knew deeply, something that was hers. And in these conversations, little by little, she began to talk about other things too. Told him about Aunt Eleanor, about how she had learned to embroider, about the good days before the marriage. Didn't talk about Arthur yet, that door remained locked, but talked about who she had been before. And Daniel listened, really listened, didn't just wait for his turn to speak. Asked questions, remembered details, and treated every piece of information like a precious gift. One day, he brought an old book with illustrations of flowers, said it had belonged to his mother, that she liked plants and had catalogued every species that grew on the farm, thought Evelyn might use it as inspiration for new embroidery. She took the book with care, leafed through the yellowed pages, seeing delicate drawings of native flowers, and felt a strange emotion. He had thought of her, had seen something that belonged to his mother, someone important, and thought she was worthy of using it. "Thank you," she said, and this time managed to smile. Small smile, but real. Daniel smiled back, and there was so much joy in that smile that Evelyn realized how much the little things mattered to him. A smile from her was worth more to him than grand gestures. That was new. Arthur always wanted grand demonstrations, clear obedience, visible proof of submission. Daniel just wanted her to be happy. The difference was abysmal. August arrived bringing hotter days. Evelyn already had considerable inventory of embroidery. Daniel suggested she return to the market, this time with her own stall. He helped set everything up, carried the pieces, stayed by her side while she organized. Several people stopped to look. Some bought, others placed orders. By the end of the day, Evelyn had sold more than half the inventory and had a list of orders that would take weeks to complete. She counted the money that night with a sense of unreality. It was hers, earned with her own work, with her own talent. No one could take that away. No one could say she didn't deserve it. It was tangible proof that she had value, that her hands served to create beauty, not just to survive. Daniel appeared at her door that night. Knocked before speaking, respecting privacy as always. Evelyn opened, and he was there with the expression of someone who had something important to say. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. She nodded and made room, but he didn't enter. Stayed on the threshold, maintaining appropriate distance. "I was thinking," he began, choosing words with care, "you are working a lot with the embroidery, more than with the house. And there is no problem with that, let me make clear. But it seems to me you aren't a housekeeper anymore. You are an artisan, and an artisan shouldn't have to clean another person's house to have a place to live." He paused. "What I mean is that you can continue living here in your room, but as a resident, not help. Can focus on embroidery, sell your work, build your own business, and when you are ready, if you want, can look for your own place at some point. But there's no rush, no charge." Evelyn stood looking at him, not knowing what to say. What he was offering was real independence. It was a chance to rebuild a life without needing to trade domestic work for a roof. It was an investment in her as a person, not as an employee. "But I can't just live here for free," she protested. "That isn't right." "You aren't living for free," Daniel replied firmly. "Your presence here is worth more than any housework. And besides," he added with a lighter tone, "you saved Star. Just that is already worth years of room and board." She almost smiled at that. He knew how to lighten heavy moments. "Think about it," he said. "Don't need to decide now. Just wanted you to know you have an option." And then he walked away, leaving her alone with a choice that was actually a gift in disguise. She didn't need to think much. The next morning said she accepted, but imposed a condition. She was going to pay symbolic rent. Not much, because she was still building the business, but something needed to feel she contributed, that it wasn't charity. Daniel accepted, and a low amount was agreed upon that represented principle more than real financial need. And so, life changed again. Evelyn now passed whole days embroidering, took breaks to help Mrs. Hattie when the woman needed because she liked the cook's company, but it wasn't obligation anymore. It was choice. Everything was choice now. Where to spend time, what to work on, when to rest. It was freedom she hadn't known in a long time. The relationship with Daniel was evolving naturally. There was no pressure, there was no rush, but there was change. They ate dinner together now, the three of them, him, her, and Mrs. Hattie, at the big kitchen table, talked about the day, about plans, about simple and important things. Daniel told stories of the farm, of how it was when his parents were alive, of the challenges he faced keeping everything running. Evelyn began to tell more about her past, too. Still not about Arthur, but about childhood, about her aunt, about the good days. One September night after dinner, they stayed on the porch watching the stars. Mrs. Hattie had gone to sleep early, and the two were sitting in chairs nearby, but not too close. The air was warm, full of the smell of wet earth, because it had rained during the day. There was something in the air, expectation, as if the world were waiting for something to happen. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence. Evelyn felt immediate tension, but nodded. He was looking at the stars, not at her, which made it easier. "Why do you shrink away when someone raises a hand near you, even when it's just to grab something? Why do you stop breathing when someone speaks loudly?" Evelyn went a long time without answering. The question was too direct, touched exactly the place she kept locked. But Daniel had been so patient, had waited so long, had respected so much. Maybe he deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "My husband," she began, and her voice came out raspy. "He didn't hit me, not in the traditional sense, but he knew how to hurt in other ways." She pulled her shawl around her shoulders, even though it wasn't cold. "He broke my things, burned my embroidery, locked me in rooms, made me feel small and foolish and useless, and I learned that the best way to survive was not to occupy space, not to react, not to exist too loudly." The words came out slowly, each one costing immense effort. "When he died, I felt relief, and then felt guilt for feeling relief. What kind of person is happy about their husband's death?" "The kind of person who was surviving instead of living," Daniel replied with a firm voice. "The kind of person who was being destroyed, bit by bit." He turned to look at her finally. "There is no guilt in feeling free when prison ends, even if the prison had the shape of a marriage." Evelyn felt her eyes sting. She didn't cry, had forgotten how, but felt the urge. "I don't know if I can not be afraid," she admitted. "I don't know if I can trust completely, even you being different. Even knowing you aren't like him, the fear is ingrained." "Don't need to trust completely," Daniel said. "Can trust a little at a time. Can trust 1% today, 2% tomorrow. Can be afraid and still stay. The two things can exist together." He paused. "I won't rush, won't pressure. But I want you to know that when you are ready, if someday you are, I will be here, waiting." There was a promise in those words that made something melt inside her chest. Not everything. There was still ice, there was still fear, there was still protection, but cracks were appearing, light was entering, and for the first time she didn't try to repair the walls. Let the cracks exist. Months passed, and life established a good rhythm. Evelyn sold embroidery regularly at the market. Her reputation grew. People came from other towns to order pieces. She raised prices because the work was worth it, and people paid. Was building real financial independence for the first time in her life. Had her own money, kept in a small box she kept in her room. It was security. It was freedom. Star grew and became a full horse, beautiful, strong, with an affectionate personality that contrasted with the frightened animal he had been. Daniel commented once that Evelyn had worked a miracle saving him. She replied that the miracle had been mutual. Star had given her purpose when she was considering leaving. Had been the anchor that kept her present long enough to decide to stay. October brought heat and flowers everywhere. Evelyn included many of them in her embroidery. Her panel of the 4 seasons was becoming beautiful. Spring was already complete, summer halfway done. It was a labor of love. Love for art, for the place, for the life she was building. And maybe, just maybe, love for a patient man who had waited at the door until she accepted staying. Who continued waiting without pressure, without demands, just with constant presence and unshakable kindness. Who had seen her broken and didn't try to fix, just offered safe space for her to rebuild at her own pace. Evelyn hadn't spoken those words out loud yet, hadn't admitted to herself completely yet, but the seed was planted, and like everything that grew on that farm, only needed time, patience, and constant care to bloom completely. Summer advanced, bringing long days and hot nights. The farm was at the height of production, everything green and vibrant. Evelyn woke early every day, not because she was forced, but because she wanted to. There was pleasure in seeing the sun rising over the hills, in drinking coffee with Mrs. Hattie while they planned the day, in sitting on the porch with her embroidery and letting time pass without hurry. Daniel maintained the heavy work routine. Tended the cattle, fixed fences, supervised the harvest, but always found moments to appear where Evelyn was, brought fresh water when the heat intensified, commented on some new flower he had seen and thought she would like, sat beside her in comfortable silence when he had a few free minutes. They weren't grand gestures, they were small, constant presences that built something greater. The embroidery of the 4 seasons was advancing well. Spring and summer complete, autumn beginning to take shape. Evelyn worked on it a few hours a day, but also did orders that paid the bills. Her name had spread through the region. People came from afar to seek her work. She had a waiting list of months. It was success she built with her own hands, literally, and this brought deep satisfaction that no external praise could give. One January afternoon, Evelyn was in the barn with Star when she heard unusual movement at the farm entrance. It was a carriage she didn't recognize. A well-dressed man stepped down and asked to speak to Daniel. She stayed watching from afar, curiosity mixed with apprehension that still appeared when there were changes in routine. Daniel talked to the man for a few minutes, then called Evelyn. "This is Mr. Abernathy," he explained. "He has a fine goods store in Chattanooga and heard about your work, wants to make a proposal." The man greeted Evelyn with respect, without trying to shake her hand, just tilting his head slightly. He explained he was looking for quality artisans to supply products for his store, had seen some of her pieces in acquaintances' homes and was impressed. Wanted to order a regular quantity of embroidery, would pay a fair price and give appropriate credit. It was a big opportunity. Bigger than anything she had considered. Evelyn asked for time to think. The man said he would return the following week for an answer. When he left, Evelyn stood processing. Daniel approached slowly. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking this is too big," she admitted. "If I accept, I'll have to produce much more. It will be full-time work. Won't be time left for much else." She looked at him. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Daniel stayed quiet for a moment, then replied carefully, "I think you are more ready than you think, but don't need to decide alone. I can help. We can hire someone to take care of simpler parts. You do the fine work, teach another person to do finishes, divide responsibility." It was a practical idea that hadn't occurred to her. Evelyn had always worked alone, but maybe it was time to expand. Maybe it was time to think bigger. She spent the week considering, talked to Mrs. Hattie, who was enthusiastic about the idea. The old woman said she knew a girl from the village who was looking for work, good with her hands, would learn fast. Evelyn agreed to meet her. The girl appeared on Saturday. Her name was Clara. She was 19, delicate hands and genuine willingness to learn. Evelyn showed simple pieces, taught basic stitches, and was surprised by how quickly Clara picked it up. She wasn't a born embroiderer like Evelyn, but had enough competence for finishes and less complex pieces. She was hired right there. When Mr. Abernathy returned, Evelyn accepted the proposal, negotiated terms, established realistic deadlines, and closed a deal that would completely change her financial situation, was going to earn more in a month than she had earned in a whole year before. It was real independence. It was security she had never had. In the following weeks, she established a new routine. Clara came every morning. Evelyn taught, supervised, corrected. The girl learned fast and soon was producing acceptable pieces, didn't have the soul of Evelyn's works, but had sufficient quality for sale. Evelyn focused on special orders, on pieces that required advanced technique, and left the rest for Clara with supervision. Daniel observed everything with barely disguised pride. He commented one night while they ate dinner that she had built a real business, that she had taken talent and transformed it into a company, that it was an impressive achievement for anyone, but especially for someone who had arrived there months ago with nothing but a battered suitcase and fear. Evelyn felt strong emotion hearing that, because he was right. She had done this, had taken broken pieces of her own life and rebuilt something not just functional, but beautiful. Something that had value, something that was hers and no one could take. February arrived bringing humid heat that stuck to the skin. There was tension in the air. Not bad, but expectant. As if something were about to happen, and everyone felt it but no one spoke. Evelyn noticed in Daniel's looks, which lasted a second longer, noticed in the way he found excuses to be close, noticed in her own chest, in the way her heart raced when she heard his voice. One afternoon, a summer storm formed quickly. Sky darkened in minutes, wind began to blow hard, and first drops fell thick and heavy. Evelyn was on the porch and ran to gather the embroidery before it got wet. Daniel appeared helping, and when they finished taking everything inside, the rain was already a solid wall of water. They got stuck on the covered porch, watching the storm. Lightning cut the sky, thunder made the ground shake. It was a spectacle of nature's brute force that had something mesmerizing about it. Evelyn felt strange energy in the air, as if the storm outside echoed something happening inside her. Daniel was close, closer than he usually stood. She could feel his heat, even without touching him, could hear his breathing under the noise of the rain, and for the first time didn't feel the urge to move away. Felt the urge to stay exactly where she was, maybe even get closer. "Evelyn," he said low, and there was something different in his voice. She turned to look and found him already looking at her. His eyes had an expression she had seen before but never let register completely. It was desire, but not the selfish kind. It was desire mixed with respect, with care, with a wish to get closer, but willingness to wait as long as necessary. She didn't look away this time, sustained it. And in that moment, with the storm roaring around and the world reduced to that piece of porch, Evelyn made a decision. Didn't think, didn't analyze, just acted. Took a small step in his direction, then another. Daniel stood completely still, barely breathing, giving her total control of the moment. When she was close enough to touch, she raised her hand slowly, placed it on the side of his face, feeling the stubble, the warmth of the skin. Daniel closed his eyes, as if that touch were something sacred. She saw the reaction, saw how much that simple gesture meant to him, and something inside her let go completely. "I trust you," she said. The first words of that kind she spoke. "I am still afraid." I don't know if the fear goes away completely someday, but I trust you. And She swallowed hard, gathering courage to say what she had discovered in recent weeks. I think I'm falling in love with you. Daniel opened his eyes, and what she saw there was everything she needed to see. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't possession. It was pure joy, mixed with tenderness. It was requited love, offered without conditions. I have been in love with you since the day you decided to stay, he said with a hoarse voice, since the day you stopped at that gate and chose to return. But I would wait another 50 years if necessary, would wait a lifetime. She believed him. And in that belief, in that trust, she closed the small remaining distance and leaned her forehead against his. It wasn't a kiss yet. She wasn't ready for that, but it was proximity she had never allowed. It was real intimacy. It was a choice to be close, to share space, to let someone in. They stayed like that until the storm passed. When the sun began to appear between the clouds, painting everything gold, they separated slowly. Daniel ran his thumb gently on her cheek, a gesture so delicate it almost didn't exist, and smiled. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting, for staying, for letting me know you." Evelyn smiled back, complete smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. "Thank you for waiting," she replied, "for not giving up, for seeing something in me that I had forgotten existed." That night marked a definitive change. They didn't start sleeping together, didn't declare official courtship to the world, but between them there was understanding. There was silent commitment. There was love growing at its own pace, without rush, but growing strong and true. The following days were different. There were touches now, small but deliberate. His hand brushing her shoulder when passing, fingers interlacing for seconds when handing something. Him sitting closer on the porch, shoulders touching while they talked. Every touch was negotiated silently, each respecting the other's limits, but expanding those limits gently. Mrs. Hattie observed everything with obvious satisfaction. "Finally," she murmured one morning, when she saw the two laughing together about something silly. It was about time. Evelyn heard and didn't deny. It was true. It was about time. Maybe she had taken longer than other people would take, but it was her time, and that was right. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to ring the bell and share with someone who also needs to believe it's possible to start over. March brought unexpected news. Mrs. Hattie announced she was going to visit her daughter in a distant city, was going to stay a few weeks, left food prepared, clear instructions, and left, leaving Daniel and Evelyn alone on the farm for the first time. Clara came during the day to work on embroidery, but at night it was just the two of them. It was a situation that should have scared Evelyn. Months ago it would have. But now it was just different. They ate dinner together, just the two at the big table. Talked about everything, plans for the farm, ideas for the embroidery business, childhood memories, dreams for the future. Conversations were getting deeper. Evelyn began to talk about Arthur. Not everything, not all details, but enough. Enough for Daniel to completely understand where her fear came from. He listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said he was very sorry she had gone through that no one deserved to be treated that way, that she was brave not just for having survived, but for having chosen to try again, for not having let that experience define the rest of her life. Those words healed something deep inside her. Because he didn't try to minimize, didn't try to fix, didn't say the past didn't matter. He acknowledged the pain, validated the experience, and honored the strength it had taken to move forward. It was exactly what she needed to hear. One night, they were on the porch, as usual. There was a full moon leaving everything silvery. The air was warm, full of nocturnal farm sounds. Daniel held her hand, gesture that had become common now, and asked, "Can I kiss you?" Evelyn felt her heart race. It wasn't fear. It was nervousness mixed with anticipation. She had already thought about this, had already imagined how it would be, but imagining was different from doing. "You can," she said finally, slowly. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, for her to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want to. She stayed where she was, eyes closed, waiting. When his lips touched hers, it was soft like a flower petal. Brief, respectful, but charged with emotion. When they separated, Daniel observed her face with concern. "Are you okay?" She nodded. Better than okay. It was perfect. It was a kiss that asked for nothing. It was a kiss that offered everything. It was a kiss that confirmed what both already knew, that this was real, was solid, was meant to last. Days turned into weeks. Mrs. Hattie returned and found obvious change. The two weren't hiding the relationship anymore. Weren't effusive, wasn't their style, but there was comfort between them that didn't exist before. There was certainty. The old cook commented one morning, "Getting married, then?" Evelyn almost choked on her coffee. Daniel just smiled. "If she accepts," he replied calmly, as if they had discussed this, but they hadn't. At least, not out loud. Evelyn looked at him surprised. "Is that a proposal?" she asked. Daniel placed the cup on the table and turned to her completely. "It can be, if you want it to be, or it can be just conversation about possibility. I know you need time. No marriage can be a scary word considering your past, but I want you to know that when you are ready, if someday you are, I will be here, wanting to build a life with you, officially." Evelyn felt emotion rising in her throat. Months ago she would have said no immediately, would have run from the simple mention of marriage. But now, with Daniel, it wasn't terrifying. It was a good possibility. It was a future she could want. "I need time," she said honestly, "but not much. Just need to get used to the idea. Relearn what marriage can be when it's good." He accepted that without hesitation. "No rush," he said. "In your time. Always in your time." April brought milder temperatures. The embroidery of the 4 seasons was almost complete. Just lacked final touches on winter. Evelyn worked on it with renewed dedication because she had decided. When she finished that piece, she was going to give it to Daniel. It would be a gift. It would be a way of saying, without words, everything she felt. The business with the Chattanooga store was going exceptionally well. Mr. Abernathy was satisfied. Customers were satisfied, and orders continued arriving. Evelyn had money saved now. Considerable amount that represented security she had never had. Could technically buy her own place. Set up her own studio. Be completely independent. She mentioned this to Daniel one afternoon. Not as a threat, not as intention, just as observation. "I could leave," she said. "I have money for that now." Daniel stayed quiet, and she saw a shadow pass through his eyes. But when he spoke, his voice was firm. "You can do whatever you want. You always had that freedom. If you want your own place, I help look. Help move. Whatever you need." "But I don't want to," she said, looking at him. "I don't want to leave. I just wanted to know if you know I stay because I choose to. Not because I need to, not because I have no option. Stay because I want to be here, because here became home, because you became home." The expression on his face changed completely, went from restraint to pure joy. He pulled her into a hug, first complete hug they shared, and Evelyn let him. Let his arms surround her, let herself feel safe, protected, but not trapped. It was a crucial difference. Arthur hugged to confine. Daniel hugged to comfort. Everything was different. When they separated, she said, "I think I'm ready to marry if the offer still stands." Daniel laughed, rich and happy sound. "The offer will stand for the next 50 years at least. So yes, let's get married. Whenever you want. They married on a day in May. It wasn't a big ceremony. Just the preacher from the village, Mrs. Hattie, Clara, some close neighbours. Evelyn wore a simple dress she had embroidered herself, delicate white flowers on the bodice. Daniel wore Sunday clothes, hair slicked back, eyes not leaving her. When they exchanged vows, words were simple but charged with meaning. Promising love was easy. Promising patience, respect, freedom, those were promises that mattered. The party was small. Food Mrs. Hattie prepared. Fiddle music one of the neighbours played. Laughter and conversations under a starry sky. But the most important moment was when everyone left and they were alone. First night as husband and wife. Evelyn was nervous, couldn't deny it. There were bad memories associated with this part of marriage. Daniel sensed the tension. They were in the bedroom, and he stopped before anything, looked at her and said, "We don't do anything you don't want, can just sleep, can talk, can do whatever you feel comfortable doing. There is no expectation, there is no obligation." Those words took the pressure off. And without pressure, Evelyn discovered she wanted to be intimate with him, wanted to rewrite that part of her life with good memories. It was slow, it was delicate, it was everything it should be and nothing she feared. And when they finished and lay in the dark, hands interlaced, she realized she had finally left the past completely behind, had reclaimed that part of herself, had transformed fear into something beautiful. The following months were of happy adjustment, learning to live as a couple, share space, build routines together. There were small arguments sometimes because they were humans, and humans disagree. But they were healthy arguments. No one shouted, no one used words as weapons. They talked, found middle ground, moved on. The embroidery business continued growing. Evelyn now had 3 girls working for her, not just Clara. Had a studio set up in one of the farm buildings, had a name recognized in the region and beyond, was a successful businesswoman, and every penny was fruit of her own talent and hard work. Daniel expanded the farm production too, bought more cattle, planted more land. They worked side by side, each on their project, but always supporting each other. He helped her with numbers when she had doubt. She gave opinion on farm decisions when he asked. Were partners in the fullest sense of the word. Star grew and turned into a magnificent horse. Evelyn rode him sometimes, galloping through the fields with wind in her face and feeling of pure freedom. Daniel rode beside her, and together they explored every corner of the property. There was something poetic in how the orphan foal she had saved now carried her to new places. It was full circle. 2 years passed. Then 3. Life established a good rhythm. There were challenges, there always were, but nothing they couldn't solve together. The farm prospered, the business prospered, and more importantly, they prospered. One autumn afternoon, Evelyn finished the last stitch of the 4 Seasons embroidery. Had taken years, but was complete. It was a huge piece, intricate, showing the farm in all its facets. Spring with flowers exploding, summer with vibrant green, autumn with golden leaves, winter with silvery frost. It was a masterpiece. The best thing she had ever created. She framed it and hung it in the main room of the house. Daniel stood in front of it for a long time, just looking. "Have to sign," he said finally. "Work like this needs artist's name." Evelyn embroidered her initials in the corner discreetly. ETV, Evelyn Thorne Vance, had kept her maiden name as part of identity, added his as choice. It was a perfect symbol of who she was now, someone who honored where she came from, but embraced where she was. Years continued passing, 4, 5, 6. Daniel's hair began to show grey strands. Evelyn had fine lines around her eyes from smiling so much. Mrs. Hattie got slower, but continued commanding the kitchen with a firm hand. The farm continued productive, the studio continued profitable, and they continued in love, not in the explosive way of new passion, but the deep and constant kind of love that had been tested by time and remained strong. Love that came from daily choice to be together, to support each other, to grow side by side. One night, 10 years after that day, Evelyn had arrived with a battered suitcase and broken heart. They were on the porch, watching stars as they did so many times. She was leaning on him, head on his shoulder, comfortable and safe. "Do you regret?" she asked suddenly. "Having waited so long? Having spent so much time with someone so complicated?" Daniel laughed low. "Not for a second," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "You weren't complicated. You were careful, and had every right to be." He took her hand, interlaced fingers. "Every day I waited was worth every year we have now. Would do it all again exactly the same way." Evelyn smiled in the dark. She believed him. After everything, after all tests and challenges and moments of doubt, she had learned to believe. Had learned that true love was patient, was kind, was respectful, was everything she had refused to believe existed, until finding a man who proved otherwise. "I love you," she said. Words she spoke every day now, but never lost meaning. "I love you for having waited, for having seen something in me that deserved to be waited for having let me come to you at my own pace." "I love you," he replied as always, "for having returned, for having chosen to stay, for having let me love you the way you deserved to be loved since always." They stayed there until late, counting stars, making plans, just existing in the space they had built together. Safe space, full of genuine love, where a woman who had refused any affection had learned not just to accept, but to reciprocate, where a patient farmer had received a reward beyond anything he could have imagined, where two wounded hearts had found healing in one another. Willow Creek Farm continued prospering for many years. Evelyn's studio gained national fame. People came from afar to order pieces from her. She trained dozens of girls over the years, passing knowledge forward, creating opportunities for other women like she had received opportunity. Daniel continued being exactly who he always was. Good man, hard-working, patient, who woke up every day grateful to have the woman he loved by his side, who never regretted having waited at the door, who knew that the best things in life don't come easy, but come right when you have the patience to wait. Mrs. Hattie lived to an advanced age, seeing everything she had helped build flourish. She always said she had seen many loves in life, but few as true as Daniel and Evelyn's, few built on such a solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine patience. Star lived a long life for a horse. When he finally departed from old age, he was buried in a beautiful spot on the farm, near where he was born. Evelyn wept for the loss of the animal that had been mirror and companion, but wept also from gratitude, because saving Star had been the first thing that made her want to stay, had been the beginning of everything that came after. 15 years after that March of 1923, when Evelyn arrived, the farm looked different. More buildings, more people, more life. But the essence remained the same. It was a place of new beginnings. It was a place where a broken woman had found space to heal. It was a place where patient love had proved stronger than any fear. Evelyn was now 42, still embroidered, but less out of necessity and more for pleasure. Had delegated most of the business to the girls she had trained, spent more time just living, enjoying every day, never taking for granted the peace she had found. Daniel was 53, hair whiter than dark now, but eyes still having the same kindness as always. Still woke early, still brought flowers sometimes, still looked at his wife as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. Because for him, she was. On a random spring afternoon, sitting on the porch where they had spent so many hours over the years, Evelyn commented, "You saved my life. You know that?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "I just gave space. You saved your own life. You made the choice to return. You did the work to heal. You built all this." He pointed to the house, the studio, everything around. "I just got lucky to be here when you were ready." She smiled and took his hand. "Then we got lucky with each other, and with that gate, with the decision I made there, with all the small choices that led to this moment." He agreed. "We got lucky with many things, but mainly we got lucky to have had patience, to not have given up, to have believed it was worth waiting for the right time, and it really had been worth it. Every day of waiting, every moment of doubt, every small step toward trust, everything had been worth it to get there, to have that, to live that life that seemed impossible when it all started. The story of Evelyn and Daniel became something of a legend in the region. People told about the embroiderer who arrived with nothing and built an empire, about the farmer who waited patiently until she was ready, about love that bloomed slowly but grew strong enough to last generations. And on starry nights, when travelers passed by Willow Creek Farm and saw a light on the porch, they also saw a couple sitting side by side, hands interlaced, looking at the same stars they had seen 1,000 times before and would see 1,000 times more, and knew they were seeing something rare, something true, something that proved real love isn't about explosive passion or grand gestures. It's about choosing the same person every day. It's about giving space for growth. It's about having patience when it's hard and having gratitude when it gets easy. It's about refusing affection until finding someone whose affection deserves to be accepted. It's about waiting at the door until the person is ready to enter. It's about building a life together, brick by brick, stitch by stitch, day by day. And in the end, it's about looking back and knowing that every moment of struggle was worth it to get there, to have that, to be those people who chose to build something beautiful from the ashes of painful pasts, who chose to believe that starting over was possible, who proved that it was. Evelyn and Daniel's final years were peaceful. They grew old together the way they had always done everything, side by side, supporting each other, finding joy in simple things. A sunrise, a shared cup of coffee, the sound of rain on the roof, hands interlaced while they slept. The legacy they left was greater than a prosperous farm or profitable business. It was an example. It was living proof that broken people can heal when they find a safe space, that true love is patient, is kind, is incapable of hurting, that it is worth waiting for the right person, because when you find them, every second of waiting turns into eternal gratitude. The gate where Evelyn had stood that crucial night remained as a landmark. She never let Daniel replace it, even when the wood began to rot. Said that gate had seen the most important decision of her life, deserved to be honored. So Daniel reinforced it, repaired it, kept it standing. And it continued there, silent symbol of choice, of courage, of everything that can happen when you decide to stay instead of run. And if you pass by there today, decades after it all began, you will still find that gate, will still feel the weight of a decision that was made there. Will still be able to imagine a young woman standing with a suitcase in hand, heartbroken, trying to decide between the safety of known fear and the risk of unknown love. And you will know she chose right, that she returned, that she stayed, that she built a life beyond anything she could have dreamed, that she found a man whose love was exactly what songs say exists, but few people really find, and that she proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that it is possible to start over, no matter how broken you are, no matter how many walls you have built. When you find the right person, willing to wait, willing to respect your pace, willing to love you exactly as you are, while giving space to become who you want to be, then magic happens. And all fear, all pain, every dark moment of the past turns into context that makes the present even more precious, turns into a story worth telling, into an example worth following, into proof that true love exists, conquers all fears, and is worth every second of waiting.